Thank you. Good morning, everybody, and thank you for the introduction. I'm glad to be here with you for this interesting event on the Hydrogen Valley. So indeed, my name is Pietro Caloprisco, and I am a project officer at the Clean Hydrogen Partnership. In the next 15 minutes, let me actually put the watch, I will give you a little bit of an overview of what we've been doing throughout the years to support, to develop the concept of the hydrogen valleys and what we are currently doing, and also a little bit of what's planned for the future. So first of all, just one slide, I promised to explain what is the Clean Hydrogen Partnership or Joint Undertaking. As it was said, we are a European institutional public-private partnership, and within our governance, we have both the public and the private, which are represented. The Commission is representing the public sector, while the two groupings organized by Hydrogen Europe Industry and Hydrogen Europe Research are representing the two different souls of the private sector. For the period 2021 to 2027, we have been entrusted with 1 billion euros to be managed. This is coming from the Horizon Europe program for research. Of course, the 1 billion that we are managing is only dedicated to fuel cells and hydrogen technologies. On top of that, as it was mentioned, and it's interesting for what will come later, in May 2022, we have been given an additional 200 millions, but this is not for developing the technology in general. This is really for deploying hydrogen valleys. Now, with that out of the way, this is a little bit at a glance what we have been doing with hydrogen valleys since 2014. And you can broadly divide our actions in two main streams, in two main areas: the initiatives, the type of tenders, studies, and we could call it type of soft support we are providing to the creation of hydrogen valleys. And then there is what we could refer to our core business, so the grants that we are giving to support projects. And I will go through all of these initiatives to give you a little bit of an idea of what has been done so far. Also understand that this is just a selection of the key, most interesting things we have been doing, because there is actually quite a few more things that are running in the background. So we'll start with the initiatives and the region initiative in particular. So this starts in 2016. Now, as you can imagine, 7 years ago or so, there wasn't so much attention to the fuel cells and hydrogen technology. It was still perceived pretty much as a niche technology, not a mainstream way to decarbonize, be that the industry, the energy sector, or the transport. So the level of awareness that you had about the technology was pretty low. And when you would go down at the local level, it was even lower. And yet there was quite a few regions that were starting to be interested into the fuel cells and hydrogen potential to decarbonize, to implement their decarbonization plans. So with this initiative, we started to engage with a lot of regions. Around 89 regions were taking part in this exercise. And the idea was really to provide some clarity, to, on one hand, understand what was their plan, their ambition, and on the other hand, to start to explain what the fuel cells and the hydrogen technology could deliver for them. All of this knowledge, these exchanges lasted around 2 years. It consisted in surveys, workshops, and different types of interviews. And all of that then led to a report where we were describing the different business cases that could be implemented for the fuel cells technologies at local level, describing also, in a nutshell, what was the ambition, the intentions of the regions, and try to identify what were the next steps. One of the concrete outcomes was also the signature of a memorandum of understanding by these 89 regions that were committing to continue the cooperation with the joint undertaking to further develop these ideas, these ambitions, and these plans to see how they could concretely then become viable projects. And this initiative, even though it was just, the beginning of this whole idea of the hydrogen valleys, was interesting because it then created the knowledge on which we built a number of additional initiatives. And the first one that I would like to mention as a follow-up is the project development assistance. So with the regional initiative, let's say we took a picture of what was happening. Okay, what is your interest? What the technology can do? There was a lot of interest. We wanted to go one step forward, ahead. And the project development assistance was a tender that we published in 2020 and lasted for 1 year. And the idea there was really to transform these desires, these plans, into viable projects that would be ready for implementation, ready to receive funding. So the idea was that a number of consultancies, led by Spillet, and we have also Nadine here in the room, and we will hear more about it later, they would really guide these different local authorities and help them to fill their gaps that they had in terms of knowledge from a technical, legal point of view, to understand, okay, how you shape up a project, how you bring it to arrive to the point that you will be able to receive funding for implementing such a project. Altogether, 11 regions received this type of consultancy services, and there were few more local authorities that also wanted to join, but unfortunately we didn't have the funds, to include them all. So we created also the Observers Network, and the purpose of this group was really to absorb some of the knowledge that was created, even though they couldn't access this type of one-to-one services that were provided by the PDA. Altogether, the 11 projects that came out, they had like a combined capex that was between 650 and 750 millions, and each one of the projects had a capex of at least 50 millions. So you see that the ambition started to be quite big. The PDA stopped in 2021, and the idea was that these 11 projects that have been developed in the following year would have to enter into the implementation phase, meaning, okay, you have a concrete project, now go out there for the funding and get it done. We are still following up there to see what exactly has happened as a follow-up. The interest was so high that we followed up with the PDA 2 in 2022, the following year, and this PDA is still ongoing. As you can imagine, the logic is pretty much the same. It's again organized one-to-one meetings, local authorities and hydrogen experts, consultants that are helping them to transform their ideas into projects. And one of the deliverables is really like, concrete project plans. On top of that, we are helping them to get in touch with the industry and devise proper funding strategies. The ambition is the same. In this case, we are aiming for 15 regions to take part in this exercise, but what has changed is the geographic focus. If in the first PDA we had mostly Western member states from Europe and countries from North Europe, the second PDA was focused on the cohesion countries, outermost regions and islands, because really the idea here is to make sure that there is like a coherent, a nice spread of all the hydrogen valley potential. So we want to see them to come up everywhere in Europe and not just, let's say, within the border of the usual suspects. So where we stand now, we have, well, when I say we, I mean Spillet and their colleagues, they have selected the 15 regions that will receive the services. They had the first kickoff meetings and they start to shape up the concrete project plans. And also in this case, once the PDA services are concluded, we will have to enter into the implementation phase. And if we look here, you can see a little bit Europe-wide how we are trying to provide these services, how we want to create a pipeline of hydrogen valleys. So you see during the first PDA in blue, it was mostly Western Europe and Scandinavia, with some member countries from the Central Eastern Europe. While on the second one in green, it's mostly going in different areas. So even if you see France, for example, that's the La Réunion island. It's not the mainland France, let's say, that is being covered. And that's what I wanted to share with you about the PDA. So it's still ongoing. I think it's a very interesting initiative. It's appreciated. It helps to create the expertise that is needed then to lead to concrete projects. There is then another interesting, let's say, initiative or tool. This is the Hydrogen Valley platform, but I will not talk about it right now because there will be actually later on a presentation dedicated to that. I will just mention that this is a very interesting interactive tool for any project developer that is interested to look into the valley topic to understand what is happening right now, what are the, and get a lot of knowledge. But more about that you will hear later on. We then move to the other stream of action, which is the grants that we have provided so far to support directly the deployment of hydrogen valleys. But before I go ahead, maybe now it's interesting to just stop 1 minute to say, okay, what do you mean by hydrogen valleys that you mentioned so far several times? Of course, when we started to put in our call for proposal, calls dedicated to hydrogen valleys, we also had to clarify what we meant by valleys. And so we have relied on this definition. A hydrogen valley is identified in a geographic area where hydrogen serves more than one end use, be that in the industry, in the mobility, or in the energy sectors. Normally, it involves a multi-million type of investments, and the whole value chain of hydrogen is present. So you have the production of hydrogen, the infrastructure, the distribution, and some of the end uses. I think that makes clarity without being too restrictive, and it allows anybody who wants to submit a proposal for our calls to still adapt to its local reality. Now, so far, as I mentioned, we had 3 calls dedicated to what we were calling back then hydrogen territories. We didn't have still this definition of the hydrogen valleys. And out of these calls, we had so far 3 projects. The Big Hit, which actually was already concluded. Then we have the Heaven projects, and we will hear about it later on more. And another one in 2020, which was the Green Island. So as you see, we are not new to the support to the valleys, even though the concept was a little bit different, and it was a bit sparse, let's say, the support that we have provided. You see there has been a gap of 4 years and so on. As it was mentioned earlier, then in 2022, due to the geopolitical situation that you are all aware of, the joint undertaking received an additional 200 million under the Repower EU plan dedicated only to valleys. As a consequence of that, we started to include in our OP, our annual work plans, so when we publish our call for proposals, 2 topics dedicated to valleys, one for large valleys and one for small valleys. Without going too much into the details, the key difference is the amount of hydrogen that needs to be produced and consumed within the valley on a yearly basis. Large valleys will need to produce and consume 4,000 tons of renewable hydrogen, while the small valleys will have to produce and consume 500 tons of renewable hydrogen. When we launched the call, frankly, we didn't know what would be the feedback. Would there be interest? Will people be applying? Is Europe ready for taking up on the challenge of valleys? Well, the answer is yes, because you can see as a consequence of the HOPE 2022, there has been quite a step up in the type of support that we can give to the valleys, because we ended up with 9 valleys that we are, I put the little asterisk because we are signing them now. We are in the grant agreement preparation phase. So they're not signed yet, but I think we're gonna get there. And as if you can see, the support, the European support that is being provided, that's quite a step up. So we are to 105 million that will be disbursed by the EU for the support of these valleys. Bear in mind, these 105 millions are not half of the 200 millions that we received from the Repower EU, the 200 millions. Some of it is coming from our 1 billion euros. Its internal cuisine point is we have more than 100 million left for the next round of valleys. And, sorry, I ruined the surprise. For the HOPE 2023, we had the deadline last week. We had again the calls dedicated to the valleys. And again, we were wondering what would be the feedback, the enthusiasm. And the enthusiasm is quite high because we have received 28 proposals for valleys, 8 for large valleys and 20 for the small valleys. So you see there is quite a few local realities that they feel they are ready to implement this concept. And I think this is a really great news. Fingers crossed. Let's hope that a lot of these are great proposals that they can go through and they receive the funding. And voila, this concludes a little bit the overview I wanted to give you about what we've been doing so far, stopping here and there on some of the activities. So some key numbers through mostly the PDA. So far, we are provided in a direct or indirect way support to 50 valleys. Hopefully, these projects will become valleys ready to be funded. We are providing support directly to 12 valleys, plus we still need to go through the assessment of the 28 proposals that we received. A total of 140 millions are being allocated. And yes, in July, we will see how many more valleys we will get from the last round of calls. I hope that was interesting, not so much only to see what we are doing as a joint undertaking, but you can also a little bit take this as a proxy to see at European level how the interest toward the valleys as a way to deploy hydrogen technology is increasing at European level, how this is seen as an interesting tool to further decarbonize industry, transport, and the energy sector. And with that, I conclude. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Pietro. We will have